I'm Chris Stutchko, co-host of the Ninth Grade Experience podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Teaching While Queer is a podcast for 2S LGBTQ+ educational professionals to share their experiences in academia. Hi, I'm your host, Brian Stanton, a theater pedagogue and educator in New York City, and my goal is to share stories from around the world from 2S LGBTQ+ educators. I hope you enjoy Teaching While Queer. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teaching While Queer. I am your host, Brian Stanton. My pronouns are he, they, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Nicky Meindl. How are you doing, Nicky?
Great, how about you?
I'm doing fantastic, thank you. And in retrospect, I just want to verify that I said your name correctly.
Yes, you did.
I spit things out sometimes, and I'm like, wait, is that what we discussed? So my brain's going like 7,000 miles a minute. Why don't you take up this opportunity to go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Awesome, yeah. So hi, my name is Nicky Meindl. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am a middle school special education teacher. I am non-binary trans, and I am queer. I use queer as kind of an umbrella term because I don't have all the fancy ways to describe myself at this point because there are so many words that I kind of just go with queer at a certain extent.
And really, it is an umbrella term. I do a lot of research, and if you go to queer theory, it's really just like set apart from.
Yes,
and I'm okay with that. I think that's good. I am apart from whatever you think people need to be. I'm not that. I am apart from that. So I love it as an umbrella term because I think it does include a lot more people that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a journey back in time, if you will. Indulge me. And can you tell me a little bit what it was like for you as a queer youth?
Yeah, so I didn't really come into my queerness really until my later high school years. And a large part of it was due to, surprise, surprise, band camp. If everyone's ever heard of the word band camp, they instantly go gay, and they would be right. Band camp is very queer in all respects of being separate from everyone and also very inclusive and wonderful. It's why I liked it so much. And honestly, that gave me the best way of kind of delving into my identity where there weren't really any expectations. It was just kind of like, be yourself. We're going to go with whatever you say. Like, you say your pronouns are this one day and this another day. Okay, cool. Next item on the agenda. And so it was really nice to have that space to kind of just try out, okay, what works for me, what fits for me, and then kind of like, how do I want to navigate the world as myself? Because outside of that, I really didn't have a great place. I grew up in more of a high affluent and fairly white area. I am Mexican. I was probably one of 5 Mexicans in my entire high school at the time. And so when you're one of 5 Mexicans, you know all of them. And so it's super fun when you try to like go outside the norm because no one seems to know quite what to do with you. Because, oh, well, you're Mexican, so you should fall into this category. But you pass as white sometimes too, so you should pass in this category. And I'm like, okay, consider, I don't fit into either of those boxes. This doesn't work for me. So a large part of it was navigating my identity within my other identities because it was very difficult for me to figure out what my place was and how I wanted to interact with the world, just because I didn't have as much guidance or like people I could look to because it was in a very also conservative area that there were a couple of out queer and trans folks and they were ridiculed. They weren't spoken highly of. Like, I was in the band world, so I got a little lucky, so I had like a little bit more support. But even then, if people knew you were queer, they just didn't say anything. I was like, okay, if we ignore it, it'll be fine. And it's like, the only way you could be acceptable is if you were the gay best friend. And because I didn't fall into the gay cis male box, they were like, yeah, no, so we're not going to talk about your identity. And I'm like, this helps no one. And so definitely it is something that took me a while to get into, and I wasn't fully out until my undergrad years, because it was the first time I felt that I could really kind of not necessarily reinvent myself, but like reinvest into myself to try to figure out, okay, this is a new clean slate. Maybe some people here will have seen me from high school, but it's unlikely because I was the band nerd. I stayed on my half of campus. I was the only music senior who went off to do music after undergrad, or after high school. And so not people are going to recognize me, so I might as well try whatever works. And so that really let me kind of explore my queer identity in the context of like school, with my friends, in a community, and in a workplace environment, just because I had been working like with kids since I was 13, because that's just what happens when you need to work wherever you can get the work, which was for me working with kids. And so I had been working for a while, and so this was the first time I actually got to be like, okay, what does it look like for me being able to be queer, be out and trans also in a new space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of validity to what you just said about band kids, band geek here, very proud band geek, and also found my queer identity kind of through that. Um, and also my first boyfriend, right? Yeah. And so yeah. Um, but what I think is so interesting is just like the liberation that many of us feel when we go to college. And when I started college, I started at a commuter school. And so there was a core group of people that I knew from high school that went there also. But we saw each other once every couple of weeks as opposed to every single day. And I think that having that freedom to be away from the people you grew up with just kind of helps you. I like your wording on it, reinvest in yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, did you find yourself going on your sexuality and kind of gender journey together, or did those things come in like phases? And for like, I'm not using, the trigger word phase, it's a phase, but I mean like in the steps.
Yeah, no, I get it. It came more in like progressive steps. Like the queerness came first, followed by the transness. Though I should have probably known I was trans just from all the queer shit that I was doing. So it's like I look back and I'm like, you should have known a long time ago. You just didn't have the language for any of it.
Yep.
I definitely am glad that I didn't have to go through both at once, because I think that would have been a little overwhelming for me, just because I've talked to some of my friends who've been like, yeah, figured out I was queer and trans at the same time, and I kind of just panicked. And I'm like, see, I had a delay, so I wasn't sure of anything.
And I think it's funny because, like, I think you get maybe some coping mechanisms and you get some strategies on how to, like, assess your life changes when they come, in succession as opposed to, like, all at once. Not saying that this is how life works and you get to choose, but, like,
Yeah.
I do think that, like, for those of us who kind of explore these different areas and kind of experience them in succession, it's a lot easier, I think, than folks who have to go through everything all at once. Thinking about your kind of your childhood and your own experiences, how do you see those experiences and how they impacted you playing out in your classroom and how you relate to your students?
I think it definitely impacted me in that I try to find ways to connect with my students that, like, I guess my teachers never did, because I guarantee I look back and I'm like, that teacher was definitely queer. I might not have known it and they might not have said anything, but there is no way that teacher wasn't queer. And so it's made me be more intentional with putting my queer and trans identity into my classroom, and with my students, so that they can see, okay, it's not some taboo word that we can't say, that we can't talk about. And been very intentional in that when they ask, because they always ask. Usually it takes them about 2 weeks to finally cave and be like, even after I've introduced myself, my pronouns are this. It took them about 2 weeks to finally get over that fear of, I'm going to ask. And they come out with the, Nix, I don't want to offend you, and I'm like, you're not going to offend me. I promise. Just ask me what you're going to ask me. And I already know what their question is. Why do you use they, them? And I let them ask because I want them to get over that fear of, wait, why do you use that? Because they're curious. They're kids. They want to know. They don't get to talk about it outside of this class. So I'm like, I will happily tell you, I am non-binary. I use they, them because that feels the most comfortable for me. I tried other pronouns. They did not feel right. And then I landed on they, them. And that's what just felt the most authentically me. And they're always like, huh, okay. And sometimes they get it. Other times I have, because they're middle schoolers, they like to just argue with anything I say. And they're like, but wait, how can you be there? You're one person. And I'm like, I know. English is terrible. And I have a lot of English language learners, so a lot of them agree. Yeah, English is terrible. I hate learning English. And I'm like, you're fair. I'm not going to tell you it's easy.
No.
And then a lot of them are also Spanish speaking first. So they're like, okay, but then how does that work in Spanish? And I'm like, oh boy, where do I start with that? Where does it come into Spanish? Because, like, there isn't really a gender neutral way in Spanish. It's always default to masculine. So, like, even saying teacher in Spanish is maestro or maestra. There's always the O or the A at the end. There's been a little bit of, like, development in the language in that some people have started to be like, okay, well, instead of O or an A, I'm putting E at the end, so it's maestre, to make it more neutral. And a lot of people who are of the older generation Spanish are like, that is wrong, you are defiling my language. And I'm like, one, it's not even your language, so shush. And two, language evolves over time. There are slang words now in Spanish that were not around about 50 years ago that you all accept as the world is law. So things can change.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I talked about this on my last episode because I was speaking with someone who is Filipinx, and it's the first time that I had heard the X applied to another culture outside of like Latinx. And we'd had this discussion about the older generation of folks being like, no, this is wrong and you can't say things like that. And the development of like Latine. And for me, just as being like a linguist and understanding a lot of languages, like Latin languages actually fit that kind of like O-E-A, you know, there is kind of like a precedent if you go back to Latin, and the origin of these kind of romantic languages coming from there. You can find the A or the E being representative of gender neutral term.
Yeah.
So, but that's just me geeking out and stuff. So let's move on. Have you ever been put? I mean, you work in middle school, so you know, bless you. It's funny because I could never see myself in elementary, but I could never, like, emphasis, giant letters, see myself teaching middle school. And it's ironic because when I was getting my teaching certification, I was like, I'm going to be a middle school social studies teacher. And then I did my observations and I was like, no, thank you. Absolutely
That was me
not.
with high school, so I get it.
That's like, funny
nope,
because
never.
High school was where it was at for me. I was like, I could deal with this. Because at some points you could just be like, you're acting like a child. Sit down. You're supposed to be 17. Like, act your age. You know? But middle school, it's a little bit harder to do that because they're acting their age.
Yeah, definitely.
So have you ever had to deal with any kind of anti-queer situations, whether or not they came from students or parents or community members or administration?
Yeah, so surprisingly, in my school, the queer population is a little small. I think small of that are out. There is definitely a larger one because I can like see where they're popping up. I'm like, hee, you're one of us. I'm just waiting for you to say something. But it's a smaller population of those who are like out and proud. And and part of why I think that is because there are comments that are made by predominantly the middle school boys. I won't say it's only them, but it's predominantly my middle school boys who make comments like, that's so gay. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. We're not even doing that right now. No. Or they'll use fag. And I'm like, No, we don't. I don't care who you heard that from. I don't care how pissed off you are at someone. You can be angry and hurt by someone, but you don't ever say that. Like, no, I draw my line there. And so it's hard because, like, my kids see this and a lot of teachers don't address it. They just kind of go, don't say that. And they just leave it at that. And they don't give them, okay, this is why we don't say this. Or, hey, let's not, because of whatever the reason is. There's a lot of times you can give the kids a reason. Hey, like, for example, we don't, like, make fun of we don't draw Nazi symbols on things because that's not okay. Why? Because Nazis did a lot of terrible, horrible things, so we don't want to at all show that we represent them. And they're like, okay, that makes sense. But then you go talk about being gay, and they're like, oh, just don't say it. And I'm like, okay, but give them a reason why. They're smart enough to know that there is probably a reason why they shouldn't say it. But when you make it more taboo, they tend to be like, oh, well, I can say it again later. And I'm like, no. I'm just going to draw my line in the sand here. You don't say this because this is not okay, because it sounds like you are making fun of people who are queer, who are gay. And I don't think that's what you're trying to do. And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, well then don't use it. Don't say that. If you mean that you're pissed off at someone and you want to tell them, I'm angry at you, or you think that's a ridiculous comment to make, tell them that's a ridiculous comment to make. Or, like I've told them before, you can't deal with it yourself, come tell me and I will deal with it. And I know some of the kids don't want to be what they call snitches, and I get that. But I'm also like, you guys just have to get over that fear, because how you're handling it right now isn't okay.
Yep. I think it's funny because sometimes middle school and high school culture feels a little bit like jail, where they're like, snitches get stitches and stuff like that. And I'm just like, y'all, you're 14. Calm down.
Yeah.
We aren't in prison here. This is not a prison drama. You're literally just, making sure that you handle a conversation. And I think you're spot on with we need to give them a reason why. And it's so funny that educators struggle with this, because literally, if we don't explain our why when we're teaching people, they're not going to be engaged in the learning.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how does that not make sense that we should be addressing all situations in the same way? If we're trying to teach them that it's not okay to say that, you're trying to teach them something, and we would always go to our why when it comes to trying to teach them something.
Yeah.
And I think about it a lot, like with erasing the R word. That's been a huge thing the past decade or so. And it's the same kind of situation where you give a reason, and then all of a sudden it becomes a non-issue. It's a particularly tough situation for theater students, though, because we have, not theater students, but musicians, because we have to read sheet music, and sheet music uses Italian words, and there are words like ritardando, which means to slow down.
Right.
And so then, like, you see it on the page, and especially amongst middle school and high school students, you start getting like people giggling and whatnot. And so it's hard, but it's that kind of repetition in giving a reason why that really kind of reinforces this idea that language can change. And that's exactly what we've been talking about the whole time, right?
Yeah.
Going Latino, Latina, Latine, and just kind of this evolving idea of like things that were okay to say are just not okay to say. And I think it's mind-boggling when people are like, but I've always said this and it's been okay. Like, you're trying to erase my culture by saying this. And it's like, no, like maybe we're just trying to not like treat people bad.
Yeah.
And maybe your culture needs to adjust, as it were. I don't know. That always is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
Overall, do you feel like you have a supportive administration where you teach?
Yes and no. Because like I have been out since I started teaching, so it's no secret that I use they, them pronouns. I introduce myself with that to all staff, to all faculty, to my students, so they all know it's not any big secret. That being said, even though I wear a lanyard that has my pronouns that says my pronouns are they, them, I wear a pin that says they. Because I present masculine, almost all the teachers, not all of them, but almost all of them, will go he. And while I can sometimes correct, a lot of teachers do not like that I correct because it makes them, in their mind, look bad in front of the kids because they got something wrong. And it's like, this is me being respectful to you. And with administrators, it's harder because they hold so much power, and it's like, okay, I want to correct you, but you also are in charge of my evaluation. And I don't want to get dinged on an evaluation simply because I had the gall to correct you on my pronouns.
Yeah, that's a tough situation, and that's where power dynamics are a huge concern, right? Especially in educational facilities. Like, teachers have power over students, there's an authority level there, and the administration has an authority level over teachers. And it's almost like we live in this environment of fear, back to school being like prison. Because if you overstep, or if you do something that doesn't feel like an overstep but the other person feels slighted, then there's this worry of like retaliation, and that sucks. It sucks that it's something as simple as making sure that they are addressing you the way that you want to be addressed, and that you're not given the respect for them to retain that information, because it's really not that difficult.
It's not. And I purposely wear pronouns on everything I own because I want to be like, you have no loving excuse, because I am literally wearing it right in center on my chest. So you have no excuse whatsoever to claim, well, I didn't know. It's right here. If you're looking at me, you will see it.
Yep, absolutely. It's like the other part of it like drives me crazy is that I'll put them in my email as well, and my name is also in my email, and like both of those things will be wrong at times. And I use he they, so I'm not concerned if he pops up because I use both pronouns. But like, there's a level of respect for other people that I think is kind of slowly deteriorating in the digital world, where literally the information is right in front of you and you still do it wrong.
Yeah.
Whether it be spelling someone's name wrong, or using their pronouns incorrectly, or using the incorrect pronouns. Like, it's an intentional thing that you're doing, and I have a hard time with I forgot. Yeah. Because you're right in that there are many of us who put it everywhere. It's on a lanyard, it's on a pin, it's on the email, it's all over the place, and there's no reason for you to have missed it. It's negligence at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, thinking about your own educational experience and what it's been like for you, if you were to sit down with a first-time teacher or someone who's going to work in the school for the first time, and they were concerned about being their authentic self in the classroom, what kind of advice would you give them?
I definitely think the kind of advice I would give them would center around finding a space to be you that doesn't require as much effort. Because, like, don't get me wrong, like, there are days where it takes everything in me not to lose my mind because people are just misgendering me left and right, despite corrections. But it helps that I have found at least a little bit of a space, or I've made a little bit of a space where that is less of a battle. By that I mean I helped start my middle school's, or the middle school that I'm working at, their QSA, basically. We just call it Queer Club because originally, or we call it Pride Club, but the district doesn't love the word Pride Club. They want us to call it the school's name and then the Pride Club. I just kind of pretended I didn't know and went, it's Pride Club. If you don't know what that means, oh no, what a shame. But everyone who needs to know that will know. And so it helps because I have that space with other queer and trans students who are like, okay, I am trying to get my own name and pronouns sorted out. I'm trying to figure out my own identity. And if I mess up, and if they mess up, they are always quick to be like, oh, sorry, meant this. Oh, this. Or, oh, I think, or they'll correct other people. And it feels good to be in a space where there's, like, support, because it's not just like, okay, like, you have to support. Everyone just does it because they can. And so, honestly, making that space, whether that be with students, or if you're able to find it with fellow queer teachers, believe me, I wish that there were queer teachers on my campus. I am the only one at this point. So I am making this space all on my own, but just to kind of find that community. But to also kind of reach out to the greater community, because like me, I don't have any other queer or trans teachers at my school. I am the only one. There is one queer speech language pathologist, but I rarely ever see her because she only works with kids outside of the classroom, so I don't ever see her. So I have made intentional moves to try and find queer and trans teachers outside of my school to be like, okay, please tell me I'm not the only one going through this, because if I am, I'm going to lose my mind. And so having that kind of outside support system of people who are like, either share your identity or very much affirm your identity really kind of helps ground you in your work, because otherwise it gets really hard to go back day in and day out where you're in a space where, yeah, technically they recognize you, but they're not going to honor you beyond just your name's correct.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's one, it's magic to be able to create that space. So even if you have to do it on your own, it is absolutely worthwhile to do it. And then two, it's mind-boggling what you said about the district and wanting it to be like school name pride club, because here's the thing, folks, it changes the meaning. There's a difference between, like, I don't know, I'm a University of Idaho student right now getting my master's, so we'll just say, Vandals Pride versus Pride Club.
Yeah.
Because the emphasis on the first is on Vandals, not on Pride. And so I think it's important that you make that step. And sometimes it's feigning ignorance, and that's a beautiful thing. Oops, I didn't know, so forgive me.
I'm basically asking for forgiveness rather than permission at this point.
Absolutely. And so creating that space and just finding a space, whether it's virtual or whatnot, it's really necessary. And I'm just going to put out there, folks, that Teaching While Queer will have an online community coming in 2024. So, if you need that space, I will be making one. So, keep your ears open and look for announcements on Instagram, but it's probably going to start kicking off in the summer. Because that's one of the things I wanted to do with this, is now that our voices are being heard, I want to make sure that we can then also connect to each other.
Yeah.
So thinking about your experience in academia, both as a student and as an educator, what do you think the school community can do to be more inclusive of 2S LGBTQIA plus folks? And I mean this in general. I used to ask the question specifically of students, but like the more that I do this work, the more I realize that the teachers need support too.
And honestly, I think the biggest thing, and this is going to sound very like calling for an educator, is to educate them more. Because I have kids who don't realize what it means, like who I say LGBTQ and they look at me like I've grown a third head. Or I say non-binary and like it goes sailing over their head. Obviously, I explain it to them, but I can't explain to every single one of like the 600 students in the middle school at the moment because I don't see all 600 of them. And that even includes the teachers who are like, well, what's non-binary mean? And I'm like, okay, I get it. You've been in teaching for a while, but also at this point, you have at least one, we have a couple trans kids at our school that at this point, you should know what trans means, what non-binary means when you have students like that at your school, because you actually need to support them and not just be like, they exist. Great. Congrats. Like, no. Support them beyond just being like, you exist. Thumbs up for you. No. Like, that means correcting pronouns, that means correcting names of not only the teachers who mess up, but also the students who mess up. And I'm not wanting people to be like badgered or taken down because they mess up a name or pronouns. I just want them to be like, hey, this is the correct way. Correct yourself, and then move on. Like, if you're intentionally doing it, then yes, let's have a conversation. Why are we intentionally doing this? But for most of the time, the kids aren't intentional about this. They just don't know any better because they're kids. They're not expected to know everything. Teachers, on the other hand, some of them just don't know better because they've never lived that experience. I am sometimes the first trans person that they've ever interacted with, which is terrifying when some of them have been in education for like 20 years. Because I'm like, I am not the first trans person you've interacted with. I promise you. Like, in 20 years of teaching, you will have seen at least a couple of trans kids, if not lots more. So a lot of it for me is just educating about what do these terms mean, and then providing like spaces for students to be. Because like when I even started Pride Club with my school, I the person who was running it apparently last year was an ally, and I'm like, okay, that's great, but also I feel like there should be a person in the community who's running this club. Like, I want to have your support 100%. I would love your support running this club because I am one person and I cannot do everything. But I feel like it should be a queer or trans person at the head, simply because they have lived experiences and they're going to understand what these kids are going through a lot more than an allied teacher is. And there was a little bit of pushback. Well, I've been doing it for years just fine. I've never gotten a single complaint. And it's like, okay, one, you're a teacher, so they wouldn't complain to you because there's a power dynamic there. So, of course, they wouldn't say anything. If they did, they would fear getting written up. And that's fair. Most of them would have. But, like, you have to accept that you can't know everything. And even with the kids in the Pride Club, one of the first things I told them, I don't know everything. I know a lot. And I will help you with whatever I know. Whatever I don't, I will help you figure out. So if I don't know something and you don't know something, cool, let's figure it out together. Maybe I've even offered, let's bring someone in from our local LGBT center. Let's have someone else who is queer come talk about it. Let's bring someone in from the community to talk about this thing. Just because I don't know everything, and just owning up to the kids of, look, I'm not perfect. I do not know everything, but I know something that can help, and I know at least a place to start. And a lot of times just taking that first step of, okay, this is where we can start is huge, because it's like, okay, they're like, we want to do these things, but where do we start? And that happens a lot with teachers too, where they're like, okay, I want to be supportive, but I don't even know how to start supporting you. It's like, okay, well, start with names and pronouns. If you mess up, correct. And just teaching them, it's okay to make a mistake. Because a lot of teachers, especially older teachers, are afraid of making mistakes that they just won't. I have one teacher who won't even use my pronouns, like pronouns period. We'll just say my name. That's it. They have forgone pronouns because they're so afraid of messing up. Even when I've been like, it's okay, you're gonna mess up, like, you're still learning. But they're just like, no, I can't. It's like, it's fear. It's a new thing. But you gotta be okay with messing up. Otherwise, you're not gonna get anywhere. And so it's hard when it's like, well, I've been taught for so long that it's bad to make mistakes and bad to mess up with these things. And I'm like, if you're doing it intentionally, then yes, that is bad. And then I have every right to be mad at you, as does the student. The student would have every right to get mad at you if you are intentionally messing up their pronoun and names. But if you're actively making an attempt and going, if you're saying wrong pronouns with them immediately correcting, they're not going to be mad. They're going to probably be a little annoyed just because you messed up, but they'll move on pretty quickly if they can tell this person is actively trying everything in their power to gender me correctly, to name me correctly. The kids are pretty understanding. Now, I'm not going to say that every kid is like that. Some kids are going to be angry if they mess up pronouns at all. I won't try to speak for all of them. But at least for a good chunk of them, they're going to be understanding because they want to have a space where they are recognized and honored for who they are, rather than having to just sit in the closet and just be and hope that someone will notice them.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm right there with you. I've experienced students where they are like, it's fine, that person messed up, they'll fix it. And then other students where like, this is the end of the world because this person messed up and it ruins their whole day or week. And I'm just like, okay, I need you to take a breath. It's going to be okay. People make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. And you're going to want people to take a breath and work with you and know that you can change.
Yeah.
But it's hard at that age because a lot of things get taken personally.
Yeah.
So I can understand. I can understand a little bit from a teacher perspective. On like, gosh, I don't want to make a mistake. I'm so worried about it because things can get blown out of proportion. But at the same time, if you're not putting in any effort, then that's a bigger problem, and it won't be blown out of proportion. It will be a justifiable anger coming at you. So I think that's spot on. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn over the mic to you, and you get to ask me a question to kind of round things out.
Like, if you could look forward, like, say, even 20 years for education, what would you hope progress will have made for the community?
I think one, that the necessity of a GSA will be less. And what I mean by that is, like, a QSA and a GSA, they're like fantastic resources, but they're built out of necessity. And that's the same kind of situations that occurred. It is the non-alcoholic version of things that were happening with, like, Stonewall and other bars from the 1920s on, where there were these secret places or exclusive places for people to be themselves. And I feel like GSAs are great and they're a great statement of solidarity, but at the same time, it's almost used in a way where it's like, that's where the queer kids get to be queer.
Yeah.
And so I would like to see us evolve to a point where the campus culture is just welcoming and allows people to belong regardless of who they are. That is my hope for the next 20 years. I don't know if that'll happen. Especially with the way that politics keep going back and forth, and like, we've made this hard swing back to like a time that is before even I was born. With this animosity and hatred, and, you know, the fact that the same things are being spewed from the 1980s and Anita Bryant, that, you know, were like just about gay people and before gay males, and now it's like all queer people. And so the fact that, like, here I am, almost 40, and people are using the rhetoric that was used when I was a toddler, again, is disheartening. So where are we going to be in 20 years? I don't know. Hopefully the swing will swing way back, and we won't have elections where we have, you know, Virginia's first transgender woman state senator.
Yeah.
We'll have reached a point where every state has had a representative that is a part of the community. And then that will filter into schools. And the thing is, like, someone said something on a podcast recently about schools. A lot of people think schools are where you can change the world, but schools are really just a reflection of the way the world is. And so ultimately, in order for schools to become a place that is truly understanding and belong and focus on belonging, society has to do that. And right now, with the media and social media and the ability to create videos and images and make them seem real when they're actually fabrications, and that being circulated is just creating a lot of division. And so we're not going to get a point of belonging if we are continually focused on division. That makes sense.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's my goal is I would like to see culture on campuses change so that it's truly focused on belonging, because I think it's a word that people throw out and they say that's what they're doing, but then in action, they're really not.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. Well, Nikki, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with me and coming on the podcast and sharing your story. I really appreciate it, and I've enjoyed our time talking today.
Thank you for talking to me. I had a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And all of you listening, wherever you are, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Teaching While Queer. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Leave a review, and that would help out tremendously. You can also support the podcast by going to www.teachingwhilequeer.com and hit support the show. Thanks so much, and have a great day.